Thanks, Shelley, and I would just like to thank the Gulkula for welcoming us here this weekend, and they've welcomed me onto this country many times before, and I always appreciate their generosity. We've got two guests with us today. Unfortunately, Gulkula, who was also meant to be on this panel, is unwell, so he won't be with us. But our two guests are waiting here, so I'll just introduce them quickly. Our first guest is Selena Uibo, who is the Leader of the Opposition in the Northern Territory and the Leader of the Territory Labor Party. She was elected to Parliament in 2016. She represents the Arnhem electorate. Selena is the first Aboriginal woman to lead a major political party in Australia. She has held senior portfolios in education, health, remote housing and Aboriginal affairs. Selena is a Nungabayu and Wanandiliaqua woman born in Darwin who speaks several languages. She is committed to strong, accountable leadership and to delivering for all Territorians. Welcome, Selena. And our next panellist is Steve Edgington, who is the Minister for Aboriginal Affairs. Steve is the member for Barkly in the Northern Territory, as well as the Minister for Aboriginal Affairs. He joined the NT Police in 1988, serving across the Territory for nearly 3 decades. Steve went on to be Mayor of Barkly Regional Council before entering Parliament in 2020. He was re-elected in 2024 and now holds portfolios in health, mental health, housing and community development. Steve is driven by a commitment to regional communities and is passionate about improving services for Aboriginal people and the Barkly region. Please make Steve welcome. Well, it is, as Shelley said in her introduction, an interesting time in Territory politics. It's hard to believe, but if we were standing here 5 years ago, there would effectively be just one member of the Country Liberal Party in the government, effectively two, but one who was planning to retire. And now I think we have 17 after the election last August. I think it's fair to say, Steve, and I'll start with you, I think it's fair to say what we've seen, certainly what I've seen from Darwin, in the first 12 months has been a large focus on the major urban areas. But as you say in your bio, you're someone who's passionate about improving services for Aboriginal people and the Barkly region. So I might just start by getting you to just give us a bit of an indication of what the government's plans are to do just that.
Thank you, Matt, and I also just want to acknowledge the Gulkula and thank you for the welcome here today. Really, as Matt said, we've now been in government since August last year, and as in my role as the Minister for Health, Mental Health, Alcohol Policy, but importantly housing, local government and community development and Aboriginal affairs, I also cover essential services, which is particularly relevant to many remote areas right across the Northern Territory. So coming into this position has certainly been challenging, working my way through to understand some of the key health issues and some of the challenges around budgets here in the Northern Territory. But coming into this role, I'm certainly, as Matt said, focused on really the remote area of the Northern Territory, and that's not to discount the urban areas, but there's a big role to play out bush at the moment, particularly when it comes to housing, health and essential services. You know, we can talk about police and education, but the reality is that what we've seen over many years is the changes through local government. What I'm really focused on is changing the landscape when it comes to remote communities and ensuring that Aboriginal people are empowered to look after their communities in remote areas.
And so in that, Steve, you're talking about rolling back. I remember the controversy around super shires in I think it was 2006, 2007. You're talking about rolling back some of the changes that were made there and handing more control to smaller local government areas.
That's right, and what we've seen, it's been 17 odd years now since we saw some major changes in local government. On the 1st of July 2008, over 60 smaller councils were amalgamated into what we have 17 larger councils at the moment, and they range, but the reality is that what we see is quite a significant number of regional councils where they cover massive areas, and where I come from in Tennant Creek, the Barkly Regional Council covers an area of roughly around 323,000 square kilometres. This has been spoken about since 2008, but many people, and the conversation is still going, that people living in remote areas feel that they've lost control of their communities. And this is a big issue for me because I've seen what worked before the 1st of July 2008 and the years after the 1st of July 2008 as well. So people want to take control of their communities. That's what I'm hearing. The biggest challenge that I've seen is that people are telling me that when councils were amalgamated back in 2008, yes, they lost their council, but what people tell me is that the leadership structure, the leadership in those communities was what really disappeared. It's the opportunities for leaders in those communities to make decisions when it comes to funding and how those services will be delivered in those communities. So that's a big part of why we're focused on change. It's not only to bring back smaller structures, but it's to bring back the leadership and create the opportunities for leaders in those communities to take control of their communities. But what we need to see is a pathway for young people that aspire to take on those roles in the future.
Selena, I might turn to you. 8 years you spent as part of the Gunner Files Lawler governments and as a minister in those governments, now in opposition for almost 12 months. It's been a pretty eventful week in Parliament. How have you seen the first 12 months of the CLP government from your side of the benches, particularly when it comes to Aboriginal people in the Territory?
Thanks, Matt. And one of the things I said from the outset of becoming the Northern Territory Labor Opposition Leader is I want to be constructive in my role. I want to make sure that I can work and put ideas and be constructive with the work with the Northern Territory CLP government. And I still remain, my team and I remain committed to that. But what unfortunately we're starting to see here in the Northern Territory is the CLP completely shut out all forms of engagement, particularly with Aboriginal Territorians, and I think that is one of the big dangers. We know some of the very simple facts in the Northern Territory. 1/3 of Territorians are Aboriginal here in the NT. So if we are automatically cutting, well, not we, them, CLP, Steve's team, if the CLP government is automatically cutting out the engagement, which is what Aboriginal leadership in the Northern Territory has consistently asked for, is for engagement with Aboriginal leadership. If that is cut out of the conversation, then we will have a team of 17 members of government, not a single Aboriginal representative in the government, and the consistent lack of engagement, which will lead to bad policies, which we just saw yesterday in the Northern Territory Parliament with the Youth Justice Amendment Acts of the Northern Territory being changed on urgency, without scrutiny, without engagement of the community, without ideas, without solutions, without questions. In less than 24 hours, a turnaround of a significant piece of legislation, NT law, being changed that will affect young people in the Territory. And unfortunately, majority of young people in youth detention in the Northern Territory are Aboriginal. At some points in time, 100% of young people in youth justice are Aboriginal. So if we are starting to see a government go down a dangerous path of disengagement with the very people they are making laws for the Northern Territory and cutting them out of the conversation, we will never see things get better, particularly in the justice space here in the Northern Territory.
Steve, in your opening, you talked about the need or the desire through the policies you're talking about around local government to drive that leadership in community and to get that engagement. I mean, I might just get you to respond to what Selena has said there on the point of engagement, and also the fact that we did see the CLP before the referendum oppose the voice. We've seen the CLP oppose treaty in the Northern Territory. So what's your response to that criticism that the government isn't properly engaging with Aboriginal people?
Look, this has been raised a couple of times, but really what I want to get back to is we're trying to tackle the underlying causes of crime, and these are big issues right across the Northern Territory. We're out there engaging with Aboriginal people every day of the week. And the issues that we're talking about, we're talking about
your
housing,
team might be,
we're
but
talking about housing,
but your
we're
team is
talking about
not.
health, we're talking about education, and we're talking about getting out and dealing with some of the root causes of crime. What Labor is focused on is talking about youth justice. Youth justice is an issue. What we need to do is get out there and tackle these underlying issues, and that's why we're focused on trying to fix the housing problem at the moment. We know that if a person doesn't have a roof over their head, it's going to impact on not only their life, but it's going to impact on their health, their education, and it's going to impact on their ability to get a job. These are the pressing issues that we're finding out bush at the moment. We face overcrowding of 12 times the national average when it comes to housing here in the Northern Territory. 12 times the national average. These are the things that are impacting on crime in the Northern Territory. The lack of housing, the lack of health funding. We see that the extra $1 billion for the Better Fairer Schools program is now kicking in, but we're working on a $4 billion housing program over the next 10 years that will deliver approximately 2,700 houses over 10 years. Just in the last 12 months, we've delivered 226 homes compared to 206 the year before. But there's a lot of work to be done when it comes to dealing with the root causes of crime. When we talk about remote areas, building those structures back into communities, yes, there was people that spoke about the voice, but I can assure you at the local level, getting out into remote communities, the voice that people were talking to me about was restoring their voice in their community so that they can have control of their community, make decisions, build leadership, and return the services to those communities that have been taken away since 2008.
Just on that point though of consultation, and sorry Selena, you will get a good go, I promise. But I just wanted to press you though on a couple of points that Selena raised and that you've raised in relation to the youth justice amendments that were made this week. I mean, what consultation did the government do before making those changes with the land councils, with NARJA, with other groups that represent Aboriginal people in the Northern Territory?
Look, the government has been out talking about these issues these have been issues that have been spoken about in the community for a number of years. What we're talking about is nothing new in the Northern Territory. The issues around youth justice have been spoken about. They've been spoken about many, many times over the last, as far as I can remember, over the last 8 to 10 years. The issues around youth justice are certainly not new. The changes that have been made impact on the role in detention centres and how they manage young people.
Sorry to labour a point, but just like in the weeks leading up to this legislation going through Parliament, did you consult with the land councils? Did you consult with any other groups that represent Aboriginal people, or was this was what we're going to do and we're just going to do it anyway?
Look, I don't have that info in front of me, but a lot of that work was done within the correction system. The Minister for Corrections and that particular area of government went out and spoke to different people. I don't have the names of particular people that they've spoken to, but what I do want to say is that the issues that are being dealt with at the moment are issues that have been around for a number of years.
Selena, these issues have been around for a number of years. We saw the Closing the Gap report come out yesterday. It was pretty dire from a national point of view, but from a Northern Territory point of view, you'd almost have to call it catastrophic. 8 of 15 target areas that were measured where things weren't just not on track, they were actually going backwards. And this was a measurement that was taken when the Territory still had a Labor government in power. Why, in 8 years in power, was your government unable to shift the dial on that front?
In terms of some of the results that we've seen just in the report that was released yesterday, absolutely, my team and I take responsibility when we were formally in government because we were focused on those medium and long-term strategies. We were focused on the engagement with Aboriginal leadership in our land councils, in our elders, with our communities, and we established a policy when Labor was in the Northern Territory government, and that was local decision making. It was around elements that exactly what Steve's spoken about, gave back voice and power and decision making to communities, and it was implemented systematically through the Northern Territory government. And it took 2 years, Matt, 2 years to see the first, from the policy being introduced when we first came to government. We were in for 8 years, 2 terms, 4 years, 4 plus 4. it took us 2 years to see the fruits of that policy trickle down into practicality and policy in the Territory, and that was first started through the Education Department around local school councils. So the process is not short, it is not easy, it is quite complex when you're talking about changing decades and decades and decades of the way that government does business. Talk about the discipline that needs to be kept when you are doing systematic changes in government, and talking about rebuilding the relationship and the trust in the Territory, particularly with Aboriginal leaders and community members who know that every 4 years the work that they've done may disintegrate, may deteriorate because of a political cycle. It should be systematic when we're talking about change for the better. We've seen Steve and his team now, through the CLP government, completely scrap local decision making without a single chance to engage or re-articulate what the government is going to do to keep engagement at a community level and an Aboriginal leadership level at the forefront of their decision making. We hear nothing, we see nothing, and I'll just finish on this, Matt, because you said I get a little go.
Go.
And the one thing that we have seen as well around decisions is when they are made by the new government here in the Territory in the last 11 months, the accountability and responsibility is not there. So decisions have been made, and we understand governments make decisions, everyone knows that. That's not new, that's fine. But the accountability of why decisions are being made is not articulated, and the engagement with community members, particularly Aboriginal communities and Aboriginal leadership, of why those decisions are being made, there is no accountability after a decision. So it happens in essentially town, Darwin, our capital, wherever cabinet sits. Those decisions are being made by the government here in the Northern Territory without the care or the respect to explain and to go out and re-engage people about what those decisions mean and the impact it's going to have on their communities.
Take you back half a step and give you an opportunity to have a bit more of a go, though. You talked about the political cycle and how people can't have faith when, if in 4 years there might be a new government and things might change. But is that a fair comment to make when Labor's been in power since 2001 for all but coming up 5 years? Does Labor not need to take some responsibility for the fact that just yesterday there's a report that's come out that says that 8 of 15 targets are not just not on track, they're going backwards?
Of course we take responsibility, Matt. Again, looking at what are those long-term and medium-term strategies and policies and changes of government that need to be implemented. And I'll give you 2 examples. One is the Aboriginal Justice Agreement. We were absolutely extremely proud of the work that was done by the public service, by community elders, leaders, and those who have worked in justice for decades to come to a bipartisan agreement. Steve was the Shadow Attorney General. We signed a bipartisan agreement which shows and tells you that beyond the political cycle, this is hopefully what the community expects from a bipartisan agreement, that beyond the political cycle, that it doesn't matter who wins that election, that the Aboriginal Justice Agreement will be safeguarded by the future government, whether it's Labor or whether it's CLP. Now, I absolutely think that the CLP has dropped the ball on that, and that is why we are seeing the results around crime and antisocial behaviour here in the Territory. But I'll give you a second example as well, Matt. I've got a few.
I'm not going to have to give you more of a go, am I?
I'll give you the second one now. When you make a commitment to the people of the Northern Territory, they expect you to keep their word. And the second one I'll give you is an important one because it's about election budgets. So before the Territory election last year, our Territory Labor government committed to $12 million over 4 years for Aboriginal rangers. Their grants program. So the federal government supports our rangers and funds our rangers, which we are so grateful for. Our land councils, majority of our ranger groups are auspiced through our Aboriginal land councils, and we committed that $12 million over 4 years. So did the CLP. And in their first budget this year, in May, they completely scrapped that commitment, that budgeting process. So when you make an election commitment, Governing 101 is you budget that commitment into your budgets, future, etc. And they have completely scrapped that. So you can't lie to Territorians, and particularly when you make a commitment that they trust you on your word, you get elected, and when you're in government, then you implement that election, whether it's a policy or whether it is a funding commitment. And they absolutely have broken the trust, particularly of Aboriginal Territorians on both fronts.
Well, Steve, I'll give you a chance to respond to those 2 issues. One, the Aboriginal Justice Agreement. Let's start with that. Have you walked away from the Aboriginal Justice Agreement? It certainly looked like it this week in Parliament.
Well, let me just clarify 2 points, and I think let's just walk back to local decision-making agreements. Of course, what Selena just said is that we had scrapped local decision-making. Well, she knows that's not true. I know it's
Steve,
not
I've got a letter that you said you were not
true.
going to.
I know
I have it in black and white with your signature on the bottom.
What Selena does know is that we've committed to implementing all 20 signed local decision-making agreements. She's got the letter from me. That's what we committed to. That's what we're delivering. What we said was that we weren't commencing any new local decision-making agreements. What we committed to was delivering on the 20 that we signed, that were signed by the previous government. What we committed to was to empowering people in local communities, restoring decision-making in remote areas, building back those leadership structures, making smaller councils in partnership with Aboriginal people so that they could make decisions in their communities around how funding should be spent, how services should be delivered, and to attract other funding. It's about building leadership in communities. That's what we committed to. So to come here today, Labor saying that we scrapped 20 local decision-making agreements is absolutely false, and everybody should be aware of that. When it comes to the Aboriginal Justice Agreement, yes, as the Attorney-General, I've certainly signed that, and we're working through the Aboriginal Justice Agreement. There's a range of things that have happened even since Labor signed that Aboriginal Justice Agreement. There's a couple of things that they don't want to talk about. They don't want to talk about the fact that we did have a law and justice strategy back in 1999, but they scrapped it in 2005. They don't want to talk about those sorts of things because when it comes to law and justice, when Labor walked away from that in 2005, and did nothing for the next 16 years before establishing the next Aboriginal Justice Agreement, it set the Northern Territory behind by roughly 17 years when it came to working in remote communities with Aboriginal people to tackle those law and justice issues. So we're focused on delivering when it comes to the Aboriginal Justice Agreement. We often hear about the response to youth justice, but what people aren't talking about is the work that we're doing to tackle the underlying issues when it comes to working with young people in communities. We do have bail support, we do have diversion programs, and we are working with young people in remote areas. So there's a lot of this conversation that often doesn't get spoken about, but I can assure you there's a lot more to tackling youth justice, and we're dealing with that in a more holistic approach.
And the Aboriginal Rangers?
The Aboriginal Rangers, like many things, so this budget, for example, coming into government, what we are faced with is roughly about a $4 billion program. Now, listening to that, a program is a whole lot of infrastructure or programs on a list that need to be funded. There was roughly $4 billion worth of projects and programs on the infrastructure program. What Labor had committed was $300 million in cash to try and fix a $4 billion program. We know that that doesn't add up. So we've had to make some significant decisions when it comes to managing our budget for this year. You would have read in the media the Gulkula Health Clinic. In my area alone, we couldn't build a new school at Ali Kurung. We simply couldn't do it, because there's no money in the budget, Matt. And these are the significant things that often get overlooked. You need money to build a $4 billion program and $300 million in cash to deliver. It simply doesn't add up.
People will hear you say that though, and I think people from where you come from in the Barclay would look at the way money gets spent in the Northern Territory and say, oh my God, you guys have everything up there in Darwin. You've got water slides, you've got bridges that go over roads that don't even go anywhere. You've got convention centres, and yet, we have to scrap a $12 million Indigenous Ranger program. Is the spending out of whack a bit there?
The spending is well, I shouldn't say well out of whack, but let me give a couple of examples. The previous government committed $150 million to build an art gallery in Darwin. They spent $100 million over budget to build an overpass on Tiger Brennan Drive. So there's $250 million alone that could have built a dozen health clinics. It could have built 15 schools. These are the decisions that were made by the previous government that we're now seeing the consequences of those decisions, because it's really left the cupboard bare when it comes to finances here in the Northern Territory.
Selena, do you accept that Labor in power? I mean, you talk about the Tiger Brenner Drive, which to most of the audience will be something that means nothing to them, but to explain to you, there is a road that comes in and out of Darwin between Darwin and Palmerston, which is the biggest city outside, or the satellite city of Darwin. And there were issues with one set of traffic lights, so the government spent $170 million building a bridge that goes over that one set of traffic lights. I mean, would you agree that, you know, if we drive out of here and go and turn down the Central Arnhem Highway, and we'd be lucky to get 50 k's before we have to stop because the road's impassable a lot of the time, that it's pretty absurd to be spending that sort of money on a project that really, its necessity would be questionable in town?
Yeah, I think it is out of whack in terms of what is distributed across the Northern Territory, but critical infrastructure, and the Northern Territory is in the position where we will always be, at the moment, we're always reliant on the federal government and federal government funding. So for any roadworks that happen here in the Northern Territory, 80% comes from the Commonwealth and 20% is Northern Territory government money. So if there's a deal that's struck or an agreement that's made about what critical infrastructure, what critical roads are going to be sealed, we have, I think it's 70% of Northern Territory roads are still not sealed, then that agreement's made, and obviously the budget then is put into the ratio, as I mentioned. When it comes to the investment in communities, making communities strong, healthy, thriving, we've seen some of the great work of the remote laundry program. Like, we had a commitment, and I know the federal government has a commitment to have more remote laundries here in the Northern Territory because of the health benefits, also job benefits, and what the community can see then as the as being supported from whether it's federal government, philanthropic money, or the Northern Territory government. But when it comes to the investment into our remote communities, we have this horrible conversation or dialogue that's coming out of the CLP government at the moment, where people are saying people should stay in remote communities. So what the people they're talking about is Aboriginal people. Aboriginal Territorians should stay in remote communities. But like you said, Matt, and you highlighted, what are the things that people can or cannot access in their community? What are the services that they may have to leave their community or homeland for? What are the opportunities that they may leave their community or their homeland for, and what are the challenges and why they're leaving their community? And some of the infrastructure investment, not aside any of the social issues, but if we're just using that as an example, infrastructure and investment, water parks that can also have health benefits, infrastructure in school, and Steve highlighted.
Yeah, and I agree with all that, which begs the question, like, why did the previous government that you were a part of spend close to $50 million on the Nightcliff Police Station precinct, a police station that is not even open, at the same time that it was closing police stations in remote communities?
And we did build that police station, and it was not something I was necessarily part of, but I understand around the community safety aspect. And
would you agree in hindsight that was a pretty
Well, the sad
decision?
thing is that the operational model of, and I never want to bag the police, but the operational model to fully have the police in that particular police station. I mean, I'm a bush member. I'm always asking for police to be in my communities because that's what my constituents are asking for. They want to feel safe in their community as well. And there is a huge amount of work that our Northern Territory Police have done around remote policing and a model. And again, that's being implemented in the long run. Let's hope that the CLP doesn't cut the remote policing models and the work that they're doing, because again, we will see the dire consequences of that in the years. And, you know, Steve likes to give history lessons. I used to be a history teacher. I enjoy it too. But in terms of going all the way back to 2005, he just gave us the answer of why the decisions that are made now are so critical to the Territory's future, particularly for Aboriginal Territorians, because they don't just impact the 4-year cycle, the election cycle, they impact for years and years and years. And he keeps pulling out this 2005 example, and that's fine, but the impact 20 years later, 30 years later is what we're talking about. So if you start to pull investment out of justice, we have 6 law and justice groups established in communities and regions in the Northern Territory. The Northern Territory's Attorney-General has not visited one in the 11 months because guess what? They're all remote, they're all bush, and they're all run by Aboriginal leaders. She has not visited a single law and justice group in the Northern Territory. Some of them have been established because of the local decision-making agreements, and we are now hearing 2 of those law and justice groups are in my electorate of Arnhem, just outside of this Mulka region. 2 of those law and justice groups are in my electorate. I'm hearing from one of my law and justice groups that the government is asking them to prove their work or they were going to reduce their funding. The Attorney-General hasn't been out there. There now's pressure on where do we pull more dollars from, and it sounds like it's going to be justice, because the only offerings we are seeing from this government here in the Northern Territory, again, the danger of it, is this lock-em-up mentality with no responsibility of what happens around breaking the cycle of crime. They've started to use the root causes of crime. They're saying that they understand what it is, but their lack of decision-making and investing in those preventative models, in the mechanisms that will have early intervention, particularly in a young person's life here in the Northern Territory, their actions are definitely not suiting their words.
You're definitely getting a better go now. I'm going to just go back to you, Steve, and get you to respond to some of what Selena has said. Particularly, can I just say, particularly the point that she made about the Attorney-General not visiting any of these communities. And I know you spend an awful lot of time out in community, but some of your colleagues perhaps not spending as much time in community as they perhaps could?
What I'd say about that is you're exactly right. I spend a lot of time out bush. I come from Tennant Creek. It's a town of 3,000 people. It's an electorate of 450,000 square kilometres, my electorate. So I'm certainly out bush as often as I can be, visiting communities, out looking, listening and learning, as I'd say, the 3 L's. And I think this is an important part, but not every minister can get out bush. And I think, we're talking about a government that's been in place for 11 months, versus a previous Labor government that was in power for 19 out of the last 23 years. So it's very difficult to compare apples with oranges. But so, yes, we all need to be getting out bush. I'm getting out bush. I'm talking to people on the ground. But just some of those examples that you gave before about the Nightcliff Police Station. Fancy building a police station at Nightcliff when it's probably a straight line of 2 kilometres from Casuarina Police Station. But the crux of the issue here is that nobody wants to talk about is that the same time the government was committing $13 million just to build the police station, they closed the doors of the police station at Alparulam in February 2018. Now that's a border community of 300 to 400 people. The government closed the doors at that police station in February 2018 with no plan to even support that community when they walked out the door. Rather than support the community, they committed $13 million, and I think eventually they spent $13.7 million to build a police station at Nightcliff that's open between 8 in the morning and 4:21. It's virtually been closed as an office it's there as an office rather than a police station. I know where that money should have gone. It should have gone to places like Alparulam or any other communities that need those services and are focused on community safety. There's many communities that have been totally neglected. That's why our focus is about getting back to basics, working with those communities to restore real decision making in those communities, restoring leadership and giving people the opportunity to make decisions in their communities around service delivery and where the next lot of investment should go.
Just on that point, we've talked a hell of a lot about a police station that's in Darwin, given we're at Garma, but I think it is interesting symbolism. We get 80% roughly, I think, in the last budget of our revenue comes from the Commonwealth. A lot of it comes through the GST and through the Commonwealth Grants Commission, and we're getting $5 for every dollar we put in. So we're definitely we're a receiver rather than a giver when it comes to GST. Do you think, given that so much of that money is coming from the Commonwealth and through the GST, should that funding be tied? Because at the moment that money comes to the Northern Territory and it can spend it how it wants. If it wants to spend it on a water park in Darwin as opposed to a desperately needed road or police station in a remote community, it can do that. Should that funding coming from the Commonwealth have strings attached so that it needs to be spent where the need exists?
Well, look, the role of government is to try and identify those areas of need to ensure that money goes to where it's needed most. But when we talk about tide funding, $4 billion for housing coming in over the next 10 years, $1 billion investment into education.
Both Labor side, by the way.
The Northern Territory remote Aboriginal investment, $842 million over the next 6 years. And that's what our Chief Minister negotiated with the Prime Minister in February this year, $842 million, which will support remote parts of the Northern Territory when it comes to policing, when it comes to community development, when it comes to programs like FAFT, the Aboriginal Interpreter Service, alcohol management. There's a whole range of programs that they $842 million. That's essentially tide funding that is coming into the Northern Territory. So there's a lot of money coming into the Northern Territory, which really is tide money. Housing, education, and the Northern Territory remote Aboriginal investment funds.
Selena, on that point, what's your view on whether more of that funding? I mean, Steve's talking about the funding that is tied, but there is a lot that comes through the GST that is not tied, and we've talked about plenty of examples here today about questionable spending decisions that have been made by the government. Do you think that funding should be tied?
Well, I think that people want to see the Northern Territory government, whichever political colours we wear, need to be responsible for our own backyard. And I think that is what, the Commonwealth provides some of that really critical funding, and we have the ability when we're in government, and obviously Steve has the responsibility now in his team to be able to prioritise that money. And I think that's where we see, obviously, each government here in the Northern Territory can have a different value set, may have different principles in how they then prioritise money. And I think that becomes the danger of the Territory then becoming, the poor cousin, essentially, who will always be waiting on that Commonwealth tide funding, and we can only ever use it in this way, rather than the way that our community expresses that they should. And that's why the Northern Territory government should be doing their job, should be meeting, saying that people would need to be called out and show leadership when it comes to communities and when it comes to justice. We've heard, particularly, we've got land councils here. Our 4 Aboriginal land councils came out to the Parliament last week. They banded together, the 4, I've never seen it before, where they have called on the Northern Territory government to engage with and to listen to them when it comes to decision making, because they want to be part of the solution. And if a government is too stupid, too ignorant, too arrogant to see that 4 land councils who all represent traditional owners across the whole of the Northern Territory, including our 2 major island groups with Tiwi and with Groote Island and Bickerton Island, they want to be part of the solution. And what we are seeing is a disengagement of a government who ignores and then calls on Aboriginal leadership to go and fix the problem, but then won't even meet with them. It's crazy. It's this double dialogue, double standard, and it's completely inconsistent. But to be fair, I'll finish on this bit, mate. But to be fair to Steve, I do say to people that Steve is probably the only one in the 17 members of the CLP government who gets this. His problem is he is one of 9 Northern Territory cabinet ministers. He's the only one who bothers to travel out bush, because the Treasurer, who has a bush electorate, never goes out bush. He's off fishing somewhere in my electorate or another electorate. But the Treasurer doesn't get it. He represents a bush electorate. So Steve is literally the only person in the CLP that I believe, and I get to bash him around in Parliament all week, and then poor thing, he usually gets me 3 days. Now he's got me 4. But he is the only one who gets it, and that's because of the constituents that he talks to, the experience he's had as a police officer in the Northern Territory, the experience he's had as a local government member and now minister, as the Mayor of Barkly previously. But he is in a very, very large pool of teammates who do not care about the bush, who do not consider Aboriginal leadership as one of the first port of calls when it comes to decision making in the Northern Territory that impacts 1/3 of the Northern Territory. So he has a very difficult position, and I recognise that, and I do tell people that closely and now obviously publicly. There you go, Steve, I don't always rubbish you. But he will be the only one in that team who gets it, and unfortunately he's not going to be able to do that in the team that is led by Leah Finocchiaro, who is our Chief Minister, who didn't even have the respect to come to Garma for the first time since being elected in the CLP government.
Damning you with faint praise there, Steve. But on the serious issue, I mean, we did see the 4 land councils come out a week and a half ago, and were very critical of your government and the way that they're dealing with you, and they accused you of implementing racist policies. If we're going to have a prosperous Northern Territory, the land councils certainly play a big part of that. Is that relationship irreparably damaged now? Can you fix that relationship with the land councils, many of whom are standing here, and I see Matty nodding his head. But obviously you're willing to do it, but can you convince your colleagues about how that can best be done?
Look, there's a lot of work that's being done. I've got good relationships with the land councils. The chair of Northern Land Council, Matty Ryan's here today. Last week I was over in Tiwi, and it was a great opportunity to meet with the Tiwi Land Council, and we discussed some of these very issues that we're talking about today. My view is, of course, we can maintain a strong relationship with land councils. We see land councils as partners when it comes to reducing crime. We're elected on a platform of reducing crime, rebuilding the economy and restoring the Territory lifestyle. Land councils are a partner of ours. I regard land councils as a partner. I regard all Aboriginal people, remote communities and organisations as partners. I chair the Northern Territory Executive Council on Aboriginal Affairs with Dr. John Patterson from APON. Now, that Executive Council is made up of land councils, the NARJA, the Aboriginal Legal Aid Service, Northern Territory IBN, and of course what we do try to do is work together. We talk about these closing the gap issues, and we recognise that there's many challenges in reducing and closing the gap. What we are doing, in my view, is working closely together. We all understand some of these challenges when it comes to closing the gap, but what I want to assure everyone here today is that we are working together. There are some differences about how we're going to get to the end product, but I can assure you my focus is on working with land councils, Aboriginal organisations, right across the board, because the only way we're going to see a stronger economy and jobs for people out bush is to work together to bring those larger projects to fruition. Because when I travel out bush, the people living in some of those remote areas, they want to see development. They want to see opportunities for the young people in those communities to have jobs. And I often hear criticism, the people aren't doing this or people aren't doing that, but I can assure everybody here, the people that I speak to, they want to see kids go to school, they want to see opportunities for young people in their community, and they want to see development that's going to create jobs and build a future for people living in those areas. So not all of our ministers can get out bush. I'm certainly getting out there and doing the job and seeing all of these issues that impact around closing the gap. And I just want to touch on health, for example, how severely underfunded we are when it comes to delivering health services here in the Northern Territory. When it comes to the Commonwealth contribution rate, we are the lowest funded for health services here in the Northern Territory. We run Care Flight in the top end that covers exactly here where we're talking about today. Care Flight is a patient retrieval service that takes patients to the Royal Darwin Hospital or to other hospitals around Australia. It's costing our government over $50 million per year, yet everywhere else in Australia, including Central Australia, is funded by the Commonwealth. So think about where that $50 million could go when it goes to contributing to health services. We're the lowest funded when it comes to health. We're spending $50 odd million to run Care Flight, which should be funded by the Commonwealth. We've got aged care patients in our hospitals that should be cared for in appropriate facilities here in the Northern Territory. Every day of the week, we have up to 60 or 80 aged care patients in beds in our hospitals. That's not the way we should be treating our elderly here in the Northern Territory, and that's costing us $40 million a year. So that's $100 million that I've just spoken about without even touching the sides. We're the lowest funded to start with. We're also spending $100 million in our money to look after aged care patients and to run a patient retrieval service here in the Northern Territory. What we need to be doing is working together across the board, and that's what I'm focused on, working together with land councils, Aboriginal organisations, the Aboriginal Controlled Health Service. We need to be there together advocating for funding to deliver these services here in the Northern Territory. So I'll continue to work with everybody, but we need to be working together.
We're almost out of time, but I might just finish by getting both of you just to ask a quick question, to answer a quick question. We've talked across a wide range of issues, and Steve touched on the issue I want to talk about now here, but that's the issue of economic development, because I think we all acknowledge that if we can't create a real economy in the bush, then we're really going to struggle to address some of these social issues. We're standing in a place now where we see it in real life, and we see it happen with what the Gulmarch has done with a mine, with a timber mill, with all of the other enterprises that they have here, and also with their school attendance at Tupamabaka, which we heard Philip talk about today. Selena, from your point of view, what are the keys to unlocking the barriers to ensure that economic development can happen, so that it doesn't happen just here, but can happen right across the territory?
Yeah, this work that formerly we did in government, Matt, was around regional economic development plans. So we have 5 main regions here in the Northern Territory. I think there's 6 if we're using Darwin and Palmerston as its own region, but 6, but predominantly 5 remote ones. So in terms of those plans, they have had a huge amount of work and input, and it is something I hope Steve and his team take up and continue, don't cut or slash. But in terms of the regional economic, it has had input from land councils, it's had input from businesses from those regions, and it's about that footprint of what people want. How do we follow here in the Territory the localised solutions when it comes to unlocking the potential of the economy for each region? Because each region is special, each region is beautiful. I love my region, our Big River's the best, by the way. But each region is absolutely fantastic in terms of offering up the ideas and solutions, again, coming from the community, coming from businesses, coming from potential businesses and industries that are growing. We're starting to see some of the seeds of those now, which I'm happy the CLP can take credit for, that's fine. But in terms of continuing that conversation, that's why our land councils are so important, because we're starting to hear and see more successful examples of thriving businesses on country, on Aboriginal country, run by Aboriginal people, employing Aboriginal Territorians. And I think we need to see more of that, and I think there's an amazing platform here at Garma to showcase that, and they've always done that. So I very much thank YYF for the work that they do in promoting that and bringing people from other regions in the Territory to this very special place to share and connect and to support, so people can go away and continue that, not just the conversation, but the action behind it. And when it comes to the future development of the Territory, the economy, we know that the social issues and problems here and challenges in the Northern Territory are also intrinsically linked to the economy and the challenges that we hear. But they also together provide an opportunity when we can get that balance right. And unfortunately, we're not seeing that leadership. So Steve, I look forward to when you become the Chief Minister, working collaboratively and constructively with you, because he gets it, because we're not going to see the future of the Territory improve socially or in the economy unless we have that mindset and the decision making at the top level. We're not going to see that under the current government, but maybe a future CLP leadership may show that.
She's full of praise for you today, Steve. Quick response.
Well, when it comes to economic development, social and economic development go hand in hand, and we do have an economic strategy. It's based on the 5 pillars around defence, energy, mining, tourism. All of those key features. We are restructuring our economic development committees at a local level. In Tennant Creek, where I live, we established what's called the Barkly Regional Deal back in April 2019, which is heavily focused around social and economic development. But to drive many of our major investments and projects, we need to do that in partnership with land councils, and that's what we want to do. we want to see jobs, we want to see opportunities for young people, and we want to see Aboriginal businesses thriving, not only in Darwin, but right across the Northern Territory. So when it comes to economic development, we see that this is the opportunity to free up these opportunities, but to create jobs. And we've seen that already. We've seen some agreements reached when it comes to gas. We've seen many agreements, long-standing agreements between Aboriginal people, the MacArthur River mine. We've got the mine out near Yuendamu in my location. We've just opened up a new gold mine. So those partnerships are happening when it comes to mining and gas, and we've seen some very good agricultural projects underway as well. Down in Ali Kurung, for example, a watermelon farm which has been operating there since 2008. So often we forget about the many, many good things that are happening when it comes to Aboriginal affairs here in the Northern Territory. But what I want to reassure everybody today is that I'm committed to ensuring, our government is committed to ensuring that we are partnering and working together, because we recognise the importance of a good education, a pathway for young people to get into a job, but also self-determination in communities, and that's why we're focused on building that leadership and real local decision-making in those remote areas.
On that note, can you please thank our two panellists, Steve Edgington and Selena Uibo.